Welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets, everybody. I'm your host, Austin Hare, and today our guest is Scott Graversen. Scott is the Vice President of Special Markets at Scott's Dental Supply and Strategic Advisor to dental service organizations, community health centers, and dental supply chain. So he's had a long history in the business, a successful history in the biz. And without further ado, it's a pleasure to welcome you on to the show, Scott.
Morning, Austin. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, man. You're welcome. So yeah, we always like to, kind of run through and get to know our guests and their background and their history and stuff like that. And so what was it that got you into the dental space originally? I think you first started out with Scott's Dental Supply years ago, right?
Yeah, it was a different iteration of that. But so I had no intention of getting in the dental space. I was third generation in the automotive industry and specifically in auto parts distribution. And that's where I worked out after college and absolutely love the distribution model still to this day. I like the opportunity of being able to provide customers with choices. That's why I never ended up in the manufacturing side. I didn't want to represent just one flavor of product. So I was an automotive distribution business, and one of my lifelong friends from elementary or college roommates and such, his father owned a dental supply company up in Pacific Northwest. And so I kind of always saw what he was doing, on his weekends and college when he wasn't working. He was out working dental trade shows and things like that. And then after college, he went to work there. And at some point, a few years after college, I think I was probably late 20s, he said, "Hey, my dad's getting ready to retire. My brother's the general manager of the business. My dad's in charge of all the purchasing. Your background's in purchasing. Why don't you come interview for us?" I a young father at that time, and the automotive industry just wasn't healthy, still isn't healthy. And then I thought healthcare, I'm like, how hard can it be? I mean, your tooth hurts, you're going to go to the dentist. It's kind of resilient as far as, whatever the overall economy is doing. So I came and learned about the dental business, and the company that they hired me at shortly after hiring me was purchased by Henry Schein. So I came over, the family stayed on for a transition period, and then they all left. And within, I think, 2 years into the dental industry, I became the general manager of that business.
Wow.
Under the premise knowing that Henry Schein was going to roll it into their core Henry Schein branded distribution operations at some point. So ran that business for a while. And then at the time, the person we reported to, because that business didn't fit in a nice, clean little box for Henry Schein, was the president of special markets at Henry Schein. And Hal Mueller pulled me into special markets when we consolidated that business. And if anybody's ever met Hal, they know he could be a colorful guy. He kind of gave me marching orders, said, "Hey, I've got these 3 customers that are complaining all the time. Go listen to them and make them be quiet." And those 3 customers today are known as Pacific Dental, what now is Smile Brands, and Internet. So went from working, having no experience with dental equipment, no experience with DSOs, and just kind of thrown to the wolves with a guy that trusted me, trusted my judgment to serve the customer.
And what were your main roles and responsibilities at this time?
So it really started out as project management. The pains that we learned that the groups were having were that they were growing faster than our infrastructure to support them. And obviously, the company I worked for had an amazing logistical infrastructure, but project management was something that was new to them, and specifically having a project manager that could support multiple regions. Like I wasn't a territory rep. I didn't just cover the Seattle area, for example. I was the single point of contact for those groups. So if they're building an office in Florida, if they're building in Ohio, if they're building in Texas, I was the face to that. So that was the value that we learned from me being in that role. And then we ended up modeling that role and scaling it up. And it's a commonplace role across all distribution companies now that support DSOs that operate in multiple markets.
Yeah, and the brands that you mentioned, the DSOs, dental service organizations that you mentioned, was Pacific Dental and Smile Brands, right? And now I think Smile Brands is what? They have 400, over 400 locations, and then I believe they just acquired two other DSOs.
Yeah, they're
As well.
pushing, I'm going to guess they're got to be north of 650 right now.
Yeah, yeah, between all the acquisitions they had. So that, because you've kind of had these three major players, Aspen, Heartland, and Pacific Dental were just the giants, like the whales in the industry, and they're just head and shoulders above everybody else. And now, there's such, like, they would be around 800, 900, 1,000 locations, and everybody else is, maybe hovering at the most 100 locations, or 100 and some change. And now with this acquisition, I mean, that puts these guys solidly, in striking distance of those guys. But so it's been a fragmented industry in that sense. But I'm curious, like, how many, when you were working with them, I mean, you call them the squeaky wheels. How many locations did they have back then? Like, was it evident that they were going to be, the next big players?
Yeah, they were big even back then. When I started working with those groups in 2005, I think Internet was floating around 120 locations. Smile Brands was probably 260, and I think Pacific was like 210.
Mm.
And it was a tremendous education just working with them. You learn, they're not like a private practice organization at all. I mean, the level of sophistication is very advanced. Their accounting teams are advanced, their real estate and site selection team, the facility maintenance team, professional procurement agents. And then on top of it, you throw in this X factor of private equity ownership and all of those except for Pacific. Um, the private equity folks typically turn over about every 5 years uh, and come in with their own list of demands every time they buy a new entity. So learned a lot. Really saw private equity hit the market in 2008.
Okay.
That's when I remember starting to have them at the negotiation table with us. I mean, some of these customers were buying, tens of millions of dollars just in capital equipment back then on an annual basis with their aggressive de novo rollout. So the PE guys would be at the table, and they did more good than bad for the industry. I will say that
Yeah.
they definitely compressed margins. They're shrewd negotiators, but all in all, most of them make good on their commitments for growth, and ultimately, growth is where the opportunity lies for all of us.
Mm. Yeah, it's true. And how involved were you in the site selection process during this time, or how did that teach you about, the site selection, the commercial real estate? I'm curious what principles you learned then, or were they more later on in your career?
No, I definitely learned it with those groups.
Okay.
I wasn't involved in the process itself, but I got to witness a lot of it.
Hmm.
So you really saw their strong retail presence. They would pay, AAA rents to be in prime locations. They're taking, if there's a CVS and a Walgreens on two corners, there's an Aspen and a Bright Now on the other two quite often. I mean, they really went after grade A, high visibility locations. They looked, you could, I developed an eye to understand the type of shopping centers they would go in, because you start looking for certain tenant anchors that they would commonly go in with in different markets. Grocery chain in Texas, a sporting good chain in Ohio, or whatever, wherever that commonality of demographic overlay was. And sometimes I look at some of the locations that we were building dental offices in. I'm like, you know, just past the street light here, it's nothing but sand because the town hasn't even developed yet. And then you come back 3 years later and there's 2,000 homes and subdivisions
Ah,
surrounding it.
so they were early in a lot of cases.
Very early in a lot of cases. Yeah.
So, the rents were probably not cheap on these corners. You're across from, like, the CVS and the Walgreens, like you said, these major intersections. At the time, like, sounds like 2008 era, about 13 years ago. I mean, was that considered crazy, or were people starting to understand, like, that's just what it takes?
I think they were just ahead of their time in a lot of ways. Because there was, you mentioned earlier, there was these whale groups and then everybody else. The everybody else's didn't have that level of sophistication. A lot of them were buying practices that were existing because they needed an immediate cash flow of a practice. They're like, oh, this office has got 500 grand in collections. The book value is X. I think we can reactivate those existing customers. And they do these fixer uppers. And no disrespect to that strategy, it's just a different strategy.
Yeah.
Where when you're doing a ground up, it does take a cash flow commitment to build, to float it until you build your patient
Y-
volume, but you also control the branding, you control the culture, and was able to witness a lot of that. And then also just seeing what they do on the lease sides. I mean,
mm,
in your line of work, if you go to a building owner and say, hey, I've got a tenant that wants to sign a 10-year lease with 2 5-year renewables, and they're going to spend a couple hundred grand in their own TI to renovate this, like that tenant's not looking to hop. That's a really attractive tenant to
yeah, it's a
bring
very
in.
sticky tenant.
Absolutely, absolutely. So getting to see some of the contracts they wrote was a real eye opener
So
for
you
me.
saw them leverage those strong points to get the best rates possible. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, very much so, very much so. Especially the larger groups where they're working with some of the larger landowners and where they were going in and it wasn't like I'm negotiating one lease with you. They're like, I'm negotiating 35 properties that we have with you across our 400 location organization.
Wow.
uh,
Wow. Yeah, but like, it's a landlord's dream for sure to have somebody exactly like that. They're going to spend a lot of money on the TI. They're not going to move, but also in addition to that, they've got great credit. They're accredited and they're doing great cash flows. They're super strong. They're corporately backing the leases. I mean, yeah, you got a lot of negotiating power in those situations because it's the perfect scenario. Everything lines up. Obviously, there's a point where it becomes not worth it for the landlord to do it,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah, it's a great
And
situation.
sometimes that can be a detriment to the dental office too. As I've gone in where the office will, calling the landlord saying, hey, can I get the lease space next door? And sometimes it's taken. So we've had to move some very successful offices very early just because they exceeded expectations.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. So, what was next in your career after that?
So that I started with those three um, key accounts, and then in normal fashion, when you do good work, people give you more work to do. So my territory expanded more over the Western states. I started working with a lot more of national account groups in the Western part of the states, and then also really became started building a team under me where I was coaching other project managers. And they were really salespeople, but kind of wore dual hats. So, the dental equipment sales cycle is very long.
Yeah.
I mean, think from site selection to turnover. It could be a quick 9 months. It could be 18 months. So had to have a really detailed team, but I built out that team, worked with a great group of colleagues that I learned from as well. And then 2015 was a big shifting point for me in that's when we really saw the dental market accelerate with emerging groups coming into play more and more, these entrepreneurial doctors. And the
What do you
needs
think
of
triggers that?
um,
The success of the other guys that were doing it?
I think it's a whole lot of things. The success for sure. I mean, capitalism always prevails in America. It's quite a motivator.
Mhm.
The other thing was, I think, um, not as an attractive motivator, but it was, reimbursements are flat to down. I think, people saw the scalability and the opportunity to compress expenses by sharing them across multiple offices instead of burdening it with just one location. So doctors saw it as a way uh, to retain their livelihood in a lot of ways.
Okay. All
So
right.
what I did though is, you can imagine the needs of a dentist that's entrepreneurial in nature, and say he or she has 3 or 5 practices today and they want to go to 5 or 20. The support needs of that operation are very different than a 400 plus location group.
Yeah.
There's a different level of resources inside, a different, culture that's very established. So what I did wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened organically because I like to coach and educate people. Is I took the best practices of what the large national groups did and helped educate these younger organizations so they stayed focused on what actually drove impact in their practice. So for example, there's some groups that you know are reactive in nature. They don't have a defined business plan. Their business plan is on a bar napkin, and they're like, oh, today let's go buy this practice, or let's go spend 100 grand over here on this, piece of technology for my practice. But it doesn't necessarily complement their business model. So sometimes I had to reel these doctors back in and really keep them focused on a couple core things in their business. So there's always, what are the functional needs of the business? And as related to equipment. So like, you're not doing dentistry if your air compressor or vacuum are not working. There's like 5 critical pieces of equipment. You got to have those things running. Secondary, you try and prioritize like what things will help expand capacity. If you've got an existing practice with 8 treatment rooms, but you only have 5 rooms equipped, I'd rather equip those extra 3 rooms and build capacity in that facility you already own before I suggest you go build another practice. Let's optimize the resources and the assets you already have. So then we start looking for revenue drivers, things that we can do to get more out of the existing space. So some simple things like could be a cone beam x-ray, it could be an intraoral camera, things that help the clinicians in an existing practice deliver either higher revenue procedures and or help enhance patient acceptance of the treatment plans they're delivering already. So kind of taking some of these principles to these younger groups and creating a curriculum out of it, help keep them guided with a purpose. And really it comes back to us, I couldn't write the business plan for them, but I could really teach them best practices along the way. And I found it to be a very effective way to help them grow. And the one thing, just like we were talking about leveraging, leases on multiple properties, the same thing holds true with equipment. We taught them about leveraging their buying power. If you're, don't, if I, for example, you're probably familiar with like Midmark equipment, the brand. So, if I go to Midmark and say, hey, give me a quote for Dr. Jones, who's got 5 offices, or, and say, give me a quote on 1 sterilizer, I'm going to just get, the standard deal. But if I go to them and say, give me a quote on your sterilizer, your cabinetry, your air compressors, vacuums, oh, you got your x-rays? Yeah, give me the Midmark x-rays. And by the way, doctor's going to build 8 offices in 2021. He's going to build 12 offices in 2022. And then all of a sudden you're like, now I'm not negotiating one piece of equipment. Now I'm selling a story for the doctor. And I would coach them just like we're talking right now on how to have that conversation. Like, don't sell them on what your needs are today. Sell them on the opportunity of them partnering with you now. Because there's manufacturers that would say, boy, I wish I would have given that little extra discount to Pacific when they were only, 20 locations, and now that they're
business. Yeah.
And now they're, nearly 1,000 locations, and it's harder to get them to change what their, large groups use because they have a standardized platform across all their assets.
Yeah, I like that. I like the aspect of telling a story. It's really important, right? Like our form that we're using now is a little bit of storytelling, right? It's your history, and it's really easy to get caught up in especially like type A personalities or entrepreneurial personalities, like, oh no, like cut out the boring stuff and let's just stick to the hard numbers and the details and the facts. So like in this instance, it would be, hey, like I've got this many locations, I'm growing to this much, so you need to give me a discount. Where versus like we're storytellers by nature. I mean, intrinsically, like that's what humans have grown up on. It's how we pass down stuff for generations. And so, yeah, like making it more entertaining not only helps it stick to the person's memory, creating more of a story context around it, but it also is going to get them engaged and help sell them in the process, right? Because now you're entertained, now you like the person, now you're going to sell it. It was, I think it was, oh man, Peter, Tell to Win is the name of the book. I don't remember the author, but they talk about a lot of Tony Robbins events and stuff like that. And yeah, such an influential book on me. And it's just so important, like just the art of storytelling. And people think that they're not good storytellers, and they may or may not be, it doesn't matter, but you can improve that skill. Like you can work on that muscle by telling
Absolutely.
more stories. Yeah. And so I think it's huge, that little piece of advice right there, like, hey, tell the story of your dental practice, tell the story of your organization in order to sell these guys over, because it's not necessarily about where it's at right now, it's about where it's going. And that probably going to be way more memorable in that person's mind after that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I uh I listened to your recent podcast with Vince from Platinum, and he's a great storyteller,
Yes,
without
it
question.
is.
You know, there's certain people that really have that gift, and Vince's story of being outside the industry and coming over. You can see why people get attracted to him. He's just got this charisma about him, and it's that storytelling ability that draws it out.
Yeah, yeah. Vince, he was a lot of fun to have on the podcast. You're right. He, a little bit of a different story with him. Just not dentistry at all. Not a dentist. Just started acquiring practices, and he's got a good heart. You know, he like wants to do it, wants to help people all in his organization. So, yeah, that was a fun podcast and a great example of someone telling a compelling story.
Absolutely, and I think the dental equipment, it's a different way to serve as well. Capital equipment is a huge investment for any healthcare organization, but especially in dental. And coaching people on how to purchase um, has to be an authentic thing. Just because somebody can afford more expensive equipment or is more comfortable taking on debt doesn't mean that we should guide them there. And conversely, sometimes we do a disservice if we undersell somebody as well. So,
Mm.
so really having that authentic conversation with the customer, but you do that through allowing them to tell their story. What's their background? What's their vision? Where do they want to go? And then molding solutions to them that will help them achieve their vision.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was a fitness center owner. I owned 3 gyms for a while. And I remember, speaking of cash flow, like a lot of the peers that I had, a lot of other gym owners, they would go through and they would have like a successful month or 2 month period. They'd have all this cash, and it's like, all right, we got to get all the newest equipment. Let's buy all the newest fancy equipment. Like this is going to be the game changer. This is going to take our business to the next level. And they're never really saving any money, right? Like the second they got it, immediately reinvesting it. And it's not really, it seems like it is self-sacrificing, because they're not blowing it on personal things per se, but it's also not very diligent, right? It's like not the best thing you can be doing. And you mentioned earlier when we were talking, like you had to put on the hat of CFO, you had to learn how to become the chief financial officer in a lot of these cases. So what can you say to that? Can you speak anything into that issue?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you took me some time to get comfortable in my role. Originally, project manager, I wore sales label hats of varying degrees in management, but really it's about serving the customer and understanding their needs. And sometimes their needs are not your needs. So for example, we talked about, putting on my CFO hat. I learned that through literally sitting down with CFOs and finance people to understand where are the pain points in their organization, where are the opportunities in their organization. Um, are they going to get a greater return investing in the new equipment technology that I'm promoting to them? Say it's a cone beam, and talk about the revenue expansion opportunities for a specialty program to drive new revenue to their practice. Does that bring a greater return, or do they get a greater return taking that handful of money and going and opening new dental offices or doing acquisitions? And that's not for me to answer, but that's the mindset you have to have when you're truly in a consultative relationship. And that's really one of the things that's great about the dental industry is these tend to be multi-decade relationships. They're not transactional by nature. My goal with every customer has always been, I want to be your partner for your career. They're going to be in the dental business for 30 years. I'm going to be in the dental business for 30 years, so it's, I always treat it like a courtship. It's never, you can't look at like, oh, I've got this big account and we're married, they're married to me and they're never going to go anywhere. It's like, no, you can't put on, just because you're, in a prime vendor agreement, you can't just, pull out the gray sweatpants and, put on 20 pounds and, think you're on easy street. Like, no, you got to, you know, keep doing your hair and, getting the shirt pressed, before you go out Friday night. Because, it's like a constant courtship because they're
Mm,
not married to you.
mm.
Um, and they can make changes. And we've seen some of that in the past year. I mean, some very big groups that maybe historically thought were too big to move, but you've seen Heartland move from different distributors multiple times the last several years. And Pacific recently did a big one. And they're just a couple examples. So uh, we can't ever take that for granted, that we constantly have to be striving to serve the customer.
Yeah, yeah. I heard a quote. It was like, the biggest secret about reoccurring revenue is that it's not reoccurring. Like
I love that. I
even in the
love
fitness
that.
space where it's like their membership was on auto draft, right? Like you think, okay, yeah, we're set now, but you got to earn it, every month, even if they're in a contract, even if they're in whatever, like you constantly have to earn that business, especially today more and more like, the customers have, there's been a shift in the consumer mindset historically, like the big, because things have gotten better and better, customers get more and more picky, they have higher and higher demands, and like we have to cater to those needs or you're going to lose the next guy. So yeah, your metaphor about
Absolutely.
getting groomed, ironing your shirt, all that stuff, I mean 100%, like you always have to be earning it, right? You always have to be hustling, you always got to pay rent, so to speak. So you mentioned earlier that your career went full circle. You started out working for Scott and it came back. Can you kind of explain how that went?
Yeah. So, I kind of touched on how we met, and then how he and his family separated from that business after selling to Henry Schein. They all have the entrepreneurial gene, and you know, Scott Bigler is just slightly older than I am, and he had the entrepreneurial gene. Said, hey, if I'm going to work the next 25 years, I'm going to go do it for myself, not for somebody else. So he left to go start what now is called Scott's Dental. Um, and then my career shifted a little over a year ago. Last January, I resigned from my prior role, and it was just the great old story. Great company, bad boss. It was one of those. So I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't wake up in the morning knowing where I was going, but stepped out. I acted with my heart and never looked back. And then thought I was going to take some time off. I'm a big outdoorsy guy, so I thought I was going to be a ski bum for the winter. I always had that dream and never lived it. But then I got a few weeks of skiing in, then COVID hit and shut down all the resorts. I'm like, man, now I might as well get a job, but there's this pandemic going on. And Scott Bigler and I had been in touch because of the pandemic, and he was actively working to source PPE products and all the things that everybody was frantic about this time last year. And we started a dialogue, and it naturally came back together, like, why aren't we working together again? And he recognized that his business was growing healthily, but he didn't understand the special market space, and he knew that groups were becoming more and more prevalent. So he said, hey, why don't you come over and work over here and build a business within a business? And so that's kind of the platform that I'm working on right now. And mentioned loyalty of existing customers. Like, the customer relations that I made during my with my prior employer, like, I know that the expectations of service they have. So my role in building out special markets is just that. I'm starting a business, and we're building the infrastructure and platform right now, and it's so awesome because when you're building it, you don't have to work around things either. We don't have to make compromises on things. So we're having a lot of fun, and look forward to formally launching our program later this year
Yeah,
to the
that's
market.
great. And so, like, how would you, if someone is opening up a new location and, say say it's their first one or one of the first few where they don't quite have the leverage and the buying power yet, how would you coach somebody into being able to save money and do it the most economically?
Well, so first and foremost, I always start out with what's your standard of care and what's your clinical scope. Everything we do is about serving the patient. The business, if serving the patient correctly requires an investment capital that the customer doesn't have, I have to tell them that, like, this is just what it's going to cost to do it right. You can't cut corners completely, but there's things that they can do. I always ask about their ownership model too. If I'm working with an entrepreneurial minded doctor, sometimes their ownership plan isn't that long. Sometimes like, hey, I'm going to build this thing up. I'm going to leverage my cash. I'm going to grow it to X in 3 to 5 years. I'm going to flip it to private equity. And then I'm out, cruising in the Caribbean on my sailboat, whatever their dream is. If they don't have a long-term, hold mentality, I might recommend to them some lower tier equipment because they don't care about total cost of ownership. They don't care about long-term lifespans of the equipment. But if they say, hey, no, I'm a buy and hold strategy, or hey, my kids are going through dental school, they are going to buy into the practices, like this is going to be a family, multi-generational business, like we plan to be here for 30 years, like I might educate them on something different. And sometimes the customer they're very clear in what they'll tell you. Sometimes the clinicians are so far removed from the conversations when it comes to site selection and facility design and equipment selections, because there's already a finance investor in place. And unfortunately, sometimes those talks don't go well with the non-clinicians because they don't know the nuances of the equipment. They don't understand how care is delivered. They don't understand ergonomics. They don't understand workflow. And sometimes they just focus on line item pricing. And, I'm not snobby enough not to take an order if someone wants to place an order that I don't think it's the right thing for them. I'm going to say my piece, coach them to where I think they should go. But at the end of the day, if they want to buy on the cheap or overbuy, I'm going to do my job for my employer and, serve that customer and how they say they want to be served in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you guys, are you manufacturing anything or are you like facilitating, like you're sourcing these items?
Yeah, we're a distributor. We don't make anything unique, and we've got a broad offering of high quality private label products as a way to help coach doctors into savings opportunities and non-clinically sensitive categories, like your disposable product, gloves and cups and bibs and those types of products. It's no different than shopping at Costco. You and I are consumers. You go by like, hey, do I need to have the Johnson & Johnson brand, or will the Kirkland brand work for this, cleaning solution? Like, it's probably the same stuff, and,
Yeah.
we coach doctors the same way there. And when we're looking at helping them with their budgets and such, we look at, kind of divide up their purchases into 2 categories: clinically sensitive and non-clinically sensitive. It's easier to help them get standardized on non-clinically sensitive products. So again, the gloves, the bibs and such, and get down where they only have 1 or 2 options in each of these categories. And the clinical sensitive products, impression materials, composites, there's a lot more nuances there. And, DSOs have to be mindful to not overstep their boundary on making any kind of a clinical recommendation. But usually there's a chief dental officer or a clinical advisory board that will help vet products and come up with preferred product. It's an opportunity for a dentist of any size to really kind of even leverage their buying power, even at a single location. If you're buying 3M material for one category and Dentsply product for another and Kerr product for another, and you go down the list, it's not as effective in your negotiating powers if you're like, hey, we buy all 3M, and you leverage your buying power and you consolidate that and you let the manufacturer know that, like, hey, I'm loyal to you. I want you to help reciprocate by bringing me good values as well.
Yeah.
And value could be price, value could be additional CE support. There's lots of things that can bring value to and help a dentist ultimately manage their cash flow without compromising clinical care. But they
You froze for a second there.
Yep, same. So did you. I can hear you now, though.
Okay, sorry. If can you go back about 20 seconds?
Yeah. We definitely can help dentists save on their supplies by coaching them on how to leverage their buying power. So, for example, if they're buying materials from 3 different manufacturers, if they can consolidate that to one manufacturer, that gives them an opportunity to leverage their buying power
Right,
with
right.
that manufacturer. Leverage buying power could result in potential cost savings, or it could just result in better support. Like maybe the manufacturer will come out and do on-hands clinical training for the staff to help them become more efficient in their use of the product, understand the clinical applications better. So lots of ways to drive value, but ultimately any savings that we can help a doctor realize potentially reduces the barrier to care for their patients by keeping the overhead down, and can also provide savings to help them grow and scale their business. And that's a meaningful aspiration for all of us to support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I we have we do similar things, even though it's across different industries. Like, so for us, brokerage, when people think commercial real estate, sometimes they have certain connotations, or sometimes they just have no idea what it means. But because what we do is we help facilitate, like, we do a really deep dive into analytics. Like, normally what brokerage means is like, hey, go out, I want a spot in this area, go find it for me, and like do the sort of like initial due diligence, the initial homework of finding a spot and helping me, kind of compare some options and contrast what it is. But like, our approach is much deeper than that. So instead of just going to okay, you want to go in this trade area, you need this many square footage, a lot of brokers are just put it into CoStar, whatever, LoopNet, maybe, see if it's available, see if it's not, yes it is, no it's not, find a new spot, whatever. Versus like, okay, this is your demographic, like, how do we find out where is the best location? You can maybe identify a couple trade areas. How do we make sure that you're in the best trade area? Well, that's going to take some research, right? And so it's going in and doing a whole deep dive analysis of the demographical data, the competition evaluations, anchor tenants, synergistic users, stuff like that. And then the question a lot of the time is like, okay, well, what's your fee? Like, how much are you charging? Because people aren't used to that level of service, whatever. But it's like, well, no, we don't charge a fee for that. We get paid a commission, once the transaction is done, right? Like the consulting services, a lot of people, they charge for those analytics. They charge a lot of money for those analytics. They charge for the consulting services. They charge a lot of money for that. But when that's, to us, that's just part of the process of like making sure, like, doing the right thing for the customer, making sure that their needs are met, because we don't get paid until the deal is done, and it's from the seller side. So it's from the landlord side. So the clients that we're working with, that we're representing, I mean, they don't have to pay us anything. It costs them nothing, but we have an incentive in order to build a long-term relationship to really go above and beyond. And so it's kind of like a one-stop real estate shop, right? Like, whether they're investing and they need capital to buy a building, or they want to co-invest in buying the building, or they want to just find where's the absolute best location for my business in terms of all of the different factors that go on, because there's a lot of factors. Or how can I negotiate the best rate, or the best lease rate, or the renewal, or does it make sense to relocate, right? All those types of things. But it's just doing those, even the consulting and the analytics and all that kind of stuff, is in the best interest of the client, and therefore it's in our best interest, because we're going to be the preferred guy, we're going to be their go-to guy, and it's just a holistic picture of everything related to real estate. And it sounds kind of like you guys do a similar thing too.
Very much so. Very much so. It's, again, it's kind of back to this, having this mindset. It's not a transactional relationship. We really have the clinician or the business operator's long-term goals forefront. Any good sales professional does, I believe. Mind if I ask you a question?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I remember very significantly as it relates to real estate were some of the impacts after the housing crisis, 08, 09, 10. I remember after that period that developers really dried up on new construction build outs for shopping centers and such. And so a lot of the groups that I was speaking of previously were having to go into second and third generation existing facilities, and much tougher to go into an, you know, a a second generation facility than a first generation facility that you can have influence over design. What do you think might be some of the fallout of COVID's impact on the commercial real estate market? I know a lot of tenants are, shuttering doors and or going virtual, where that's not really an option for dentistry. There's such a
Mhm.
fixed, facility requirement to deliver dental care, where I think dentists are going to gain the upper hand in negotiating for a while and be able to get some of that grade A um, commercial real estate in the prime locations. What do you see coming in the future?
Yeah, I agree with that. They'll be able to get some good spots. To take a holistic approach, a lot of people are incorrectly assessing COVID and comparing it to the 2008 financial crisis, because this is not a financial based crisis. This is not a result of bad decision making and reaping what you sow. This is a result of a pandemic, a health crisis, and it's a forced lockdown. And so the market is for the most part, recovering very nicely. And some people are holding out. I hear people in the residential real estate waiting for the next foreclosure bubble to hit, and they're going to scoop up all this real estate. And that's just not the case. I mean, interest rates are low. A lot of people, unless you're in, there's about 4 industries that were really affected. If you're outside of those industries, you're largely unaffected. You might even be doing better. So that is a trickle down effect in the commercial real estate. Usually the stock market goes first, residential real estate goes second, the commercial real estate gets hit last. It has because you have to wait through all those different things to play out full course. And so you've got people saying, I'm going to wait for the commercial real estate market to really get hit, and they're going to take advantage of all these deals. Like, you may not see that. You might be waiting forever. So my first advice is, like, don't wait for this huge fallout, because we don't know that that's going to happen, right? There might be something. Realistically, if I had to guess, and I don't know the future, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm guessing, the same as everybody else. I'm just trying to use good data to make informed decisions. I would say that the only thing you will see is the price of grade A commercial real estate will not go up. Okay, I don't necessarily think it's going to go down, but it's not going to keep increasing at the rate of inflation or above that, as we've seen in the past. And so what that means is, if you're a dentist or you're a healthcare operator and you're looking for a spot, you've been looking for a spot, and you understand the importance of going to a retail location in terms of how that can affect your patient flow and your profitability, and how that can lower some of your marketing costs potentially, then you could be looking for those restaurants that were maybe struggling, that were still in a really great spot, that are going out of business. Like, there's some restaurants, and anything related to travel or entertainment might be really struggling. Some places like around movie theater tenants and stuff like that. If you've identified a spot as like, hey, this is grade A retail, like this is the top of the top, the creme de la creme. This is like in my area, in my trade area, in my market, in the cities that I'm targeting. These are the best locations. Then yeah, keep an eye out watch those locations, because you might see these businesses, they might have lasted up until now, but they just can't go anymore. And it's like, it took a while, but they're folding. And so as you see different businesses go under, or close up shop, that's going to make locations become available that previously just A, weren't available at all, or B, the price would be crazy. Now you might actually be able to afford it in your rent budget, and it's going to be expensive. Like, that's the thing. Don't think that you're going to pick it up for pennies on the dollar. You won't, but it will be affordable, and that's going to be the difference. And so yeah, dentists can absolutely win, because furthermore, a lot of landlords would look at a dentist as an unsexy thing, right? It's like, oh well, I want like this bar, or I want this new cool hip restaurant. It's going to bring all these people here. But now they're saying there's a lot of risk. I mean, dentists are pretty safe, right? Even though they're not as sexy as the newest bar or restaurant in town. I mean, we've proven they're pandemic resilient. They're super, super safe, and they're becoming much more open to those concepts. And so, yeah, my advice would be to keep looking, like once a month, try and physically drive, because they might not pop up on the internet. They might not be notified anywhere. You might just be like, somebody might be driving by, and then you see, oh, like the open, like, says closed or shut down, or there's a county notice on the board or whatever. So like, yeah, be opportunistic about where you want to go, and physically drive those locations consistently, because it's changing every month right now. That'd be my advice.
That's good advice. That's good advice. It's interesting to see where the market's going to go. I really think that healthcare is just a special place to be. And I think one thing that we've learned out of the pandemic is just how much we all value convenience. And I think getting into a really solid facility that's got high visibility, as you mentioned, is one of the ways we help reduce barriers to care and build a business. And so now could be a
Mhm.
really good time for clients to upgrade their sites they're in or pick new sites to further grow their business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if it's a good location now, it might not be a good location forever. There's a fear about the Amazon effect coming in and affecting retail, and that's true. But I don't think it happens as fast as some people think. I mean, if it's a good location today, chances are it's going to be a good location for the next 10 years, right? Maybe not 20 years, maybe not 15 years, but people they still like to go out, they still like to do things, they're still driving. And so don't over complicate, don't be over negative or pessimistic in your viewpoint about what's happening in the future, because those locations they're going to be good for a long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, this has been great. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all your advice and that you've shed on our listeners and your stories. So if people they want to get in touch, they want to find out more about what you guys are doing or talk to you or anything like that, I mean, what's a good place for them to go and do that?
Yeah. Best way to get a hold of me is track me down at LinkedIn, Scott Graversen at LinkedIn. Best way to track me down. And I really do prioritize making time for people. If they're starting up a group, if they're questioning, their current vendors, their supply mix, I really do take it as an honor to when someone reaches out and says, "Hey, what do you think on this?" I really try and make the time to consult people and share the knowledge that I have because it just goes full circle. We can be all better operators, better care gets delivered, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Well said. All right, Scott. Well, hey, thanks very much for your time. Let's keep in touch, and hopefully, I'll see you at one of these events pretty soon, or we'll circle back around sometime next year and do a follow up.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Thank you, Austin.
Yep. All right.